as I was just mentioning, the Enlightenment in the last lecture was going to have a serious influence on the way that Europeans, in particular ruling class or upper middle class thinkers, were going to be approaching topics of politics, science, and religion. So there was what was some of the influences? One, there's advanced scientific achievements, as I just mentioned earlier in the last lecture. There was the discovery of the so-called New World and growing knowledge of other societies, right? So remember all that trade and merchants going back and forth from different parts of the world. There may have been a distorted view about different cultures through a certain cultural bias, but you were still seeing an awareness of other cultures in a way that they didn't maybe have before. Many of them were reformers, not radicals, okay? Meaning talking about simply a way of altering things as opposed to just completely uprooting and changing course. But a lot of the turmoil and events that took place and issues over religious wars and how much power a king should have became part of the topics of many of the different ways that these Enlightenment thinkers would approach things. Thomas Hobbes had his 1651 work called Leviathan. And if you see here the picture, this is the sovereign, the king, and there's all the people residing within him. Much like how King Louis said, "I am the state." There, excuse me. He basically believed that it was better to have that human society left on their own were so bad, so violent, and so chaotic that the worst sovereign, the worst king with absolute power, would still be better than anything that, let's say, a mob circumstance could turn out. And so he really promoted the idea of an absolute sovereign. Okay, John Locke takes a little different kind of vision, and those of you who are more familiar with U.S. government and thought, his Second Treatise of Government, his ideas would be influential on the way that American thinkers would approach the topic of government. He had another essay concerning human understanding, which was actually influenced by Ibn Tufayl, an actual Islamic thinker. That was a book about the idea of how human beings get knowledge. And gosh, excuse me. This is a bestseller throughout Western Europe, and it really dealt with the idea of tabula rasa. It's cut out here, I'm sorry, at the bottom. Tabularasa, a blank slate. And so, in other words, do human beings, are we born as a certain way, or do we start off blank and get influenced by society, or are we inherently a certain way? Okay, that kind of stuff was being looked over. We have Montesquieu from France. He wrote the Persian letters were essentially a mockery of Louis XIV's court, where he used the idea of the Asiatic despot and basically and the court eunuchs, and saw the nobles as kind of like eunuchs, and compared Louis XIV, or inferred as something very other than enlightened Europe. Down here, Montesquieu in The Spirit of Laws, that was also an influence a lot on certain liberal democratic systems. There's no greater tyranny than that which is perpetrated under the shield of the law and in the name of justice. And so there was a certain belief in and values about law as opposed to just raw power. And then we can cover just some of the more important philosophers. Okay, Denis Diderot, he was more controversial. He did get in trouble for things like this. He says, "Man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest." Well, that's a pretty controversial statement. Voltaire also, who's in the picture here, he said, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. So now you're having these thinkers, and by the way, he did believe in a God, not a personal one. They were called deists often. But, you know, seeing the sociological or the societal needs of certain ideas and how they would function, and taking that approach to things. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he also is very influential, and he became influential also on revolutionaries eventually. But he said, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. And so you can see how, think about the ideas that we've just talked about, the development of absolute power, of monarchs, about standing armies, these religious wars, and then, these thinkers coming out saying these kind of things, okay? A lot of these discussions would take place like in the Salon, and the Salon was more or less like a discussion parlor. There were many famous women who would bring them these discussions together, and so it would be very in vogue to have, say, some coffee or in a discussion, and for this an important woman like Madame Geoffrin. I think I just said her name wrong. I'm not good with French, I won't lie. And having these kind of like discussions or topics being brought up and so forth. You also had a literary underground at this time. We're often referred to as the Grub Street philosophers. Poor, kind of desperate hacks, or maybe someone like a adjunct professor who's barely getting by, would-be thinkers who will write these little pamphlets they could pass around, like zines, that often could criticize the government or make sexual jokes, all sorts of stuff. Okay, and if you really want to explore this interesting topic in better detail, the literary underground of the old regime, meaning before the French Revolution, by Robert Darnton, is a classic. I recommend you look it up. Okay, so we just briefly went through some of these important aspects in Western civilization. You can go over them a lot in further detail, but it kind of brings you up to speed on some of the other topics that we'll be addressing as we go throughout the course.